The Solar Order of Serbia. What the heck is this, you might ask? Let's see. Thanks to the outbreak of Operation Unthinkable, Yugoslavia was caught in the crossfires of World War III. Places like Slovenia were completely scarred by war. In 1951, shortly after the end of this devastating conflict, the victorious Soviets under Joseph Stalin engineered a coup which removed Tito from office and installed Alexander Rankovic as president of Yugoslavia. However, the latter had his own agenda, and as the Soviet Union was mired in its own internal conflicts after the death of Stalin, Rankovic reorganized the borders of Yugoslavia in such a way that it would benefit Serbian chauvinism. The autonomy of states like Kosovo and Vojvodina was cancelled, while Macedonia was also merged with Serbia. Predictably, this caused massive discontent among all the other ethnicities, which was especially spearheaded by the Croats. Many Ustase collaborators from World War II who had escaped to the West declared the continuation of guerrilla warfare against Yugoslavia, and their ranks were bolstered by cash and support from NATO, which was seething over its loss in World War III. Despite this, Rankovic somehow managed to keep the nation together, with strong Soviet support and a harsh Stalinist purge of anyone even suspected of being a collaborator in World War II. This often included innocent people who had shown indications of protesting against Rankovic's policies but had not been collaborators before. Along with the stick, Rankovic also attempted to give the carrot by increasing the autonomy of all other republics inside Yugoslavia, at least on paper, that is. In some matters like trade and internal cultural issues, these other republics did indeed enjoy more autonomy than what they had before under the Turkish, Austro-Hungarian, Karađorđevićian, or Titoite regimes. But the internal contradictions of Yugoslavia continued to grow until 1961, when the climax started. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia found itself isolated, a relic of the past, crumbling from within under the weight of ethnic tensions and the repressive policies of Rankovic and his circle. The first to break away and declare its sovereignty was Croatia, followed closely by Slovenia. For Croatia, the struggle was led under Franjo Tudjman's leadership, and he took on the labels of being a pious Christian Democrat to secure Western support. In Slovenia's case, it was not a revolutionary uprising but rather the local communist authorities and militias who moved to secure control of the republic and maintain communism in the country. Alexander Rankovic quickly deployed reserves and the local army in an attempt to reassert his authority in Croatia. But his forces encountered stiff resistance that was bolstered by support from the West. Not long after that, a rebellion led by the Bosniak army was sparked under the leadership of Alija Izetbegovic, who saw an opportunity to finally end the oppression and forced Serbianization imposed on the Bosniak people during Rankovic's time in power. Bosniak forces rose up in the regions of Topolje and parts of Herzegovina, with additional support from the Croatians in those areas as well as in central Bosnia. This weakened the Serbian front and rendered Rankovic's efforts ineffective. As a result, Croatian forces compelled the Serbians to retreat as far north as Vukovar and westward to Banja Luka in Bosnia. At this time, Italy launched a limited intervention into its former territories, issuing an ultimatum to the Slovenians to surrender Litoral and Istria. Lacking support from the only remaining communist power, China, and facing the collapse of Rankovic's front, the Slovenians withdrew to the old Rapallo border with Italy. Meanwhile, Rankovic was rapidly losing support within both his party and the army due to his failure to reassert authority in Croatia. In the following days, Marko Nikezic and his faction staged a soft coup. Nikezic managed to stabilize the front to some extent and rehabilitate Serbia's image in the Western sphere, drawing on his earlier reputation as a liberal reformer. Even after the coup, the war continued to rage on, but it soon spiraled into a deeper split between the Bosnian leader and the Croatian leader Franjo Tudman following a territorial dispute between their nations. This changed the game and opened a new front, as the Croatians who had previously fought alongside the Bosniaks turned against the Islamic army. Amidst this growing chaos, the Western powers chose to intervene, backing both Croatia and the new Serbian authority, which sought to mask itself under the liberal label. Under mounting pressure, Croatia and Serbia were compelled to sign the Treaty of Fume in the recently occupied Italian territory, recognizing the borders established earlier by the Stojadinovic-Pavelic Treaty signed in exile in 1954. With this, the Bosniak resistance was completely crushed and the final borders were set. Even with the war ending and both Serbia and Croatia joining the European Commission, tensions still remained. After this war, Slovenia became an isolated communist state in the middle of a continent that had forgotten the ideology completely. With the war's end, Serbia emerged in a stronger position than many had expected. Shortly afterward, Alexander Rankovic was put on trial in Belgrade for his crimes, with the proceedings being every bit as fair and unbiased as one might anticipate in a Balkan nation. Meanwhile, Marko Nikezic quietly ordered the liquidation of Rankovic's remaining loyalists and supporters. Thus began what became known as the Purge of the Rankoviki. Rankovic was blamed not only for failures on the front, but also for the collapse of the brotherhood and unity of the South Balkan, in Serbia and elsewhere. His policies had left Serbia's minority populations nearly erased. Kosovar Albanians, Hungarians, and Bosniaks were deported, while Macedonia was heavily Serbianized and showed little sign of seeking sovereignty. In the aftermath, Serbia was declared as a free democracy, though no real elections were ever held. Instead, Marko Nikezic and his newly formed party, the SLZ, assumed power. The years between 1968 and 1978 were prosperous for the new state, as Serbia experienced an economic boom driven by Western investments and the opening of its free market. The Serbian higher and middle classes recklessly invested in Western goods, Western shares, and Western loans with impunity and frequently on credit, knowing that the rock-solid foundation of the Western economic system would sustain their investments forever. The SLZ continued to dominate, with only minor leadership changes that left the system largely untouched. Living standards in Serbia rapidly rose, fueling promises of a prosperous and luxurious future. During this period, new political movements such as the Serbian Renewal Movement and the Serbian Radical Party began to emerge, though they attracted only limited support. The good old days suddenly came to a terrible end with the rapid collapse of America and Western Europe in the 1980s. The US collapse triggered a deep economic recession in Serbia, and unrest quickly spread. Just as in the rest of Europe, people began to protest, demonstrate, and riot in large numbers. But in Serbia, the situation was far, far worse due to the way its economy was so linked with Wall Street. Out of this turmoil, new radicals with uncompromising ideas emerged. Artist and political dissenter Dragos Kalajic, who had long published articles warning about the influence of Freemasonry and Judeo-capitalist conspiracies in Serbian politics, became a central figure. Kalajic's political and cultural views, which were largely modeled after Julius Evola, can be best described as openly fascist and deeply anti-Semitic. He considered himself a pagan and had dreams of establishing a noble state of heroes built on old pre-French revolutionary traditions. Another was Jebosa Kristic, who argued that Serbia had grown weak after the war and that liberal capitalism had wounded the Serbian nation more than it had helped it. Together, Kalajic and the Obraus movement of Kristic and segments of the Orthodox clergy formed the Solaric Coalition. Kalajic's movement resonated especially with the youth, rapidly gaining mass support. He did not campaign on reform, but rather promised a new order to resolve the problems that had long plagued the Serbian people and the Serbian fatherland. Central to his vision was his manifesto, the Codex of the Solar Order. At this point, the government had failed to handle the situation and instead began to resemble the very old Rankovic regime it had once overthrown. Mass suppression by the Serbian military had a blowback effect, however, and instead, this escalated into more violent riots. During this time, Kalajic and the Solaric Order secured the support of high-ranking elements within the army while convincing the Serbian people that the current government was attempting to sell them out to foreigners. In one of his speeches, Kalajic told the crowd, "Look at America. Do we want that to happen to us? To our homeland? To our people? So foreigners can come and take advantage of our fatherland?" In 1984, with support from the army secured, Kalajic marched on Belgrade and seized control through a coup. And thus was established the Solar Order of Serbia.